Okay. Everything's on? Good? Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Welcome to Friday night at NAASR. Good thing is, having a lecture on a Friday night tomorrow, no work. Thanks for being here. I'd like to make a few announcements before we get going with tonight's program. And actually, I would like to also urge, since we have such a nice full house, to those of you who are not NAASR members, maybe this is the night you will become a NAASR member. And those of you who are NAASR members, thank you for being NAASR members. And for those of you who support and attend our events, thank you for that too. It's been a very busy fall, and we'll take a slight breather after this evening for a bit. But coming up for us on Thursday, December 4th, we'll be having our Christmas open house, which this year will feature an illustrated presentation by Ruth Tomasian, founder and executive director of Project Save Armenian Photograph Archives. In conjunction with Project Save's 2015 calendar, Armenians Remember Those Who Came Before. That will be Thursday, December 4th. We'll be open all night, or at least as long as people are here and buying things. And the presentation by Ruth will be at 8 o'clock. On Friday, December 12th, at Northeastern University, NAASR and the Northeastern Armenian Student Association will present a panel discussion exploring identities in the Armenian diaspora, a panel discussion with the emerging generation featuring 4 young Armenian Americans of diverse backgrounds, moderated by Peter Katujian, Sheriff of Middlesex County. We'll be sending out notices about both of these events any day now, if in fact they haven't already gone out. I want to announce also a couple of other things that I've been requested to mention. On Thursday of next week, Thursday, November 13th at 6 p.m. at Harvard University's Yenching Auditorium, will be the first Hrant Dink Memorial Peace and Justice Lecture at Harvard, and it will be given by Rashid Khalidi, Edward Said Professor of Modern Arab Studies at Columbia University, entitled Unhealed Wounds of World War I, Armenia, Kurdistan, and Palestine. There are flyers, I think, somewhere in the building, and Harry Parsekian is also in the building, and you can ask him for more information or a flyer or both. On Friday, November 14th, the Armenian International Women's Association cordially invites you to attend an evening with Rachel Dink at the Armenian Cultural Foundation in Arlington, Mass. And this is the only flyer, but I will put it up on the bulletin board this evening. And since our speaker tonight, Bedross Der Matossian, has come to us from the University of Nebraska, it's a good occasion to mention that in March of 2015, on the occasion of the centennial of the Armenian Genocide, the University of Nebraska, Lincoln is hosting a 2-day conference entitled Crossing the Centennial, the Historiography of the Armenian Genocide Reevaluated. The conference is organized by our speaker tonight, Professor Bedross Der Matossian, and is co-sponsored by the Harris Center for Judaic Studies at Nebraska, NAASR, and the Society for Armenian Studies, in cooperation with the Department of History, the Human Rights and Humanitarian Affairs Program, and the Institute of Ethnic Studies at the University of Nebraska, Lincoln. And NAASR is very, very happy and excited to be co-sponsoring this excellent conference. As we are happy to welcome back to NAASR Bedross Der Matossian. Bedross is Assistant Professor of Modern Middle East History in the Department of History at Nebraska. Born and raised in Jerusalem, he is a graduate of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, where he began his graduate studies in the Department of Islamic and Middle Eastern Studies. He completed his PhD in Middle East History at Columbia University in 2008. From 2008 to 2010, he was a lecturer of Middle East History at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and we have a number of friends visiting here tonight from MIT, and I say welcome to them. He was the Dumanyan Visiting Professor at the University of Chicago in the spring of 2014, and his areas of interest include ethnic politics in the Middle East, inter-ethnic violence of the Ottoman Empire, the history of the Armenian genocide, and modern Armenian history. He has contributed to numerous edited volumes and has published in many scholarly journals. He is the author of the book, Shattered Dreams of Revolution, From Liberty to Violence in the Late Ottoman Empire, just published about a month ago by Stanford University Press. It's an excellent book, and we're very pleased. Oh, excuse me, I forgot to mention one thing. His next project he's working on is a study of the 1909 Adana massacres, and we look forward certainly to that book in a couple of weeks. No. Whenever it's complete. So, without further ado, Bedross Der Matossian, welcome.
Do I need to give this? These are my notes?
That's right.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. Of course, I'm not an alien here. I've been into NAASR many times. This is like my second home. And this, I was telling Mark, this is the first lecture that I give where I have to hug everyone from half of the people from the attendees. So it shows that I'm back in home. Thank you, Mark, for inviting me and organizing this lecture. And it's, I should say, this is the first lecture I'm giving about the book. And the book deals with the Young Turk Revolution of 1908 and examines the impact of the 1908 revolution on three non-dominant groups: Armenians, Arabs, and Jews within the Ottoman Empire. So I can't talk about the whole book, but I'm going to concentrate on one chapter, which is examining the impact of the revolution on these three groups and explain the ways in which it raised their hopes, and explain the ways in which what they waited from the revolution and how the revolution was accepted, and then how these shattered, the dreams of the revolution were shattered. But I'm going to make a grand conclusion. First I'm going to make a regular conclusion, and then I'm going to make a grand conclusion. So the outline for the lecture, I'm going to provide the historical background about these three ethnic groups in the Ottoman Empire in the 19th century in order to demonstrate how the revolution changed the dynamics of power. Then I'm going to discuss the impact on the Armenians of the empire, and then I'm going to concentrate on specifically the question of the Armenians in the eastern provinces, the lingering injustices that they were facing from the Hamidian period. And then I'm going to discuss the Armenian parties in the post-revolutionary period, the way in which they came with high hopes of a new era of achieving equality, justice, and freedom. Then I'm going to move to discuss the condition of the Jews in the Ottoman Empire, specifically the changes that took place within the Jewish community in the Ottoman Empire, and the struggles within the Jewish community. And then I'm going to discuss Zionism and the revolution, how Zionism viewed the revolution, and how they viewed it as the ultimate opportunity that they can realize their long dream of establishing a Jewish homeland in Palestine. Then I'm going to move to the Arab provinces and discuss the politics of notables in the Arab provinces, the ways in which the revolution changed the dynamics of power within the Arab provinces, and discuss also the relationship of the Arab notables with the Committee of Union and Progress, the CUP. And one case study that I concentrate a lot is the Mount Lebanon, is the autonomous district of Mount Lebanon, and examine the ways in which the revolution influenced this autonomous area. And I'm going to conclude the lecture, and then I'm going to conclude a grand conclusion for the book itself. So 6 days after the revolution, Hüsam Kechian, who was the editor of one of the most important Armenian newspaper in Istanbul, Byzantium, he wrote a lengthy article about the downfall of the Armenian patriarch Marke Ormanian, who was the patriarch of Istanbul from 1896 until 1908. And I quote, "The strong current of freedom took away Ormanian," Kechian wrote. "A day does not pass when we do not see the collapse of a major representative of the Ancien regime. It is true that we are living in a historical period, as it was for France in 1789, and in 1848 for all Europe, end quote. Ketchian's words reverberated positively among some ethnic groups. For other groups, though, the period became a critical historical juncture that threatened their power, prestige, and status. Regardless of their outcomes, revolutions profoundly changed the dynamics of power within their respective states and societies, and the 1908 revolution was not an exception. For those disenfranchised people who were dreaming of freedom, equality, and justice, the revolution became their savior, such as the Armenians and many other groups. The means by which a new and a better future would be achieved, and by which they themselves would be freed from the shackles of the Hamidian tyranny. For those elites who were wary of the revolution, however, it became their worst nightmare, shaking the pillars of their authority, endangering not only their power, but also their survival. This lecture will deal with the impact of the revolution on as I said, on the Armenians, Arabs, and Jews, three diversified ethnic groups representing vast geographic area, as well as wide range of interest groups, religions, classes, political parties, and factions. It examines the ways in which these groups internalized the revolution by creating their own ancien regimes, victories, and new era. In recent years, excellent macro-historical analysis have traced the impact of the revolution on the Ottoman state in terms of transition of power from the Sultan to the Ottoman Parliament and the Committee on Union and Progress, the interplay between the constitution and the Shariat, the tension between the executive and the legislative authorities, and contention among the major political parties of the period. In contrast, comparative examinations of the revolution's impact on the multi-ethnic composition of the Ottoman society have been scarce. Such studies are particularly challenging because the differences among the societal structures, religions, ethnicities, languages, and cultures of these groups outnumber their similarities. A comparative cross-cultural examination of these groups would provide a better picture with regards to the impact and the reaction to the revolution. It would demonstrate how these different groups negotiate and redefine their positions by adapting themselves and navigating through the new, unstable period attained by the revolution. So a brief overview of the major transformations that the Armenians, the Jews, and the Arabs experienced in the 19th century in the Ottoman Empire is necessary to a full understanding of the impact of the Young Turk Revolution had on these three non-dominant groups and how it changed the dynamics of power within these respective communities. One important point I would like to mention that besides the Arabs, the Jews and the Armenians were living in autonomous, semi-autonomous or autonomous entities called the millet system, under which these groups enjoyed a wide array of religious and cultural freedom, in addition to substantial legal, fiscal, and administrative autonomy. During the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire initiated a series of reforms to strengthen its political power and preserve the integrity of its territories under the rubric of defensive developmentism. This is known, everyone knows in the field. In total, there were three phases of reforms. The first was initiated by Selim III, then followed by Mahmud II, which was called the Tanzimat reform, and the third was the Hamidian reform period. These reforms were intended, the Tanzimat reforms were intended to secure the loyalty of the empire's Christian subjects at a time when nationalist agitations were rising in its European section. Consequently, they aimed to mold the notion of Ottomanism by breaking down religious and cultural autonomy of the millet system. Despite failing to attain this goal, these reforms made changes in the dynamics of power in the non-Muslim communities. They resulted in the promulgation of constitutions and the establishment of national assemblies among the non-dominant groups, specifically among the Jews, the Armenians, and the Greeks. The era of the Tanzimat reforms was halted by the regime of Sultan Abdul Hamid II. With the arrival of his absolutist rule, the dynamics of power once more changed among these groups. In the case of the Armenians, the National Assembly was prorogued, Patriarch Matyos Izmirilian was banished to Jerusalem for vehemently criticizing the Sultan's regime for the Armenian massacres of 1896. He was replaced by Patriarch Magakia Ormanian. as Patriarch of Istanbul. In the case of the Jews, Rabbi Moshe Halevi, who was appointed as the locum tenens in 1872 with the backing of the Hamidian regime and refused to conduct elections until the Young Turk Revolution. On the other hand, as a result of the Sultan Abdul Hamid's policy of pan-Islamism in his era, he appointed the most conservative Arab Muslims as his advisors. Thus, during the Hamidian regime, the Arab provinces of the empire gained more importance. While these transformations were taking place, an opposition group was being consolidated in the empire. This group, calling itself the Young Turk Movement, emerged in the Ottoman Empire and its expatriate communities at the end of the 19th century. Their main political party, the Committee Union and Progress, became the dominant force within the movement. After 3 decades of relentless effort and political activism, this group staged the Young Turk Revolution of 1908, reinstating the Ottoman constitution and opening the parliament. Thus, they launched what came to be known as the Second Constitution period, beginning from 1908 until 1918, which ended with the Ottoman defeat in World War I. So this is the historical background. Within this context of changes in the 19th century, Armenians living in the Ottoman Empire experienced 4 major transformations, I argue. Emergence of cultural nationalism as a result of the Armenian Renaissance, the Zartong. Changing of dynamics of power within the community after the introduction of the Armenian National Constitution, 1863, and the formation of the Armenian National Assembly. The rise of the Armenian merchant class, and finally the deteriorating political situation of Armenians in the eastern provinces that led to the emergence of the Armenian revolutionary movements. In the case of the Jews, they too experienced major transformations represented by changes in the dynamics of power in their community, by the introduction of a constitution and the establishment of a general assembly, the impact of the European Enlightenment, Jewish European Enlightenment called the Haskalah, the Haskalah, and the proliferation of education systems in the empire, which was mainly initiated by the Alliance Israélite Universelle, founded in Paris in 1860, one of the most important Jewish organizations in Europe, whose task was to educate the Jews of the East, and finally Zionism, which shaped the fate of the Jewish people in the empire. Arabs also experienced many major changes, represented by the rise of the Arab notables in the Arab provinces, who assumed the role of intermediaries between the Ottoman state and their localities, the emergence of Arab Renaissance, called Al-Nahda, represented by Arab Muslim/Christian intellectual movement, and finally the impact of the missionaries in the regions of Lebanon, Syria, and Palestine. So one day prior to the revolution, these divergent groups were living in societal structures that were centuries old. This does not, however, mean that those societies were stagnant. Despite the prevailing status quo, these variegated groups were influenced by global and regional currents of change that affected the gradual transformation of their societies. Nonetheless, the revolution accelerated these transformations and attempted to create a rupture with the previous era. Examining the impact of the revolution on different social groups reveals the deep-rooted antagonisms that existed not only within the different stratas of the society in general, but also within different institutions of society, religious, military, and political alike. These antagonisms would manifest themselves in the post-revolutionary period and demonstrate as to why revolutions are more complex phenomenon than an attempt by many people within the society to topple a government and create a new one. I have to drink, sorry. One of the major changes occurring among the Armenians in the Ottoman Empire after the 1908 revolution was the change in leadership and the transfer of the center of power from the Armenian Patriarchy to the Armenian National Assembly. The downfall of Patriarch Ormanian on the left represented the downfall of the Armenian Ancien Regime and the beginning of the new era. So these words of Ancien Regime that the Ottoman press used it in order to refer to the Hamidian era, was also internalized among these different groups, and they created their own ancient regimes and their new eras. Thus, the Young Turk Revolution became a milestone in defining intra-ethnic relationship in the empire's Armenian millet. It resulted in a micro-level revolution, I argue, culminating in the reinstatement of the Armenian National Constitution, the reopening of the Armenian National Assembly, and the election of Matyos Izmirlian as Patriarch of Istanbul. Izmirlian, who was banished to Jerusalem and stayed there until the Young Turk Revolution. The Armenian micro-revolution eliminated competing centers of power more successfully than the larger Young Turk Revolution. This is because whereas the ancien regime of the Ottoman Empire during the post-revolution period was embodied not in one person but in the Yıldız Palace clique, the Armenian ancien regime was embodied in one person, Patriarch Ormanian. Hüsam Keçyan, the editor of Byzantium, described Ormanian's dominance in the community this way, and I quote, "He was everything, and as Louis XIV said, l'état c'est moi, certainly Ormanian could truly have declared, I am the patriarchate, I'm the patriarchate, religious council, political council, economic committee, financial trustee, judicial committee, and educational committee," end quote. In addition to garnering resentment for his stronghold to power, Ormanian also was criticized by the Armenian revolutionary groups for his policies in general and his quote-unquote collaboration with the Yıldız Palace in particular. These criticisms intensified as a result of rumors that he was going to be a candidate for the Catholicos of Echmiadzin. As a result of these attacks, Patriarch Ormanian resigned immediately after the revolution. His downfall, or the downfall of his regime, was finalized by the re-election of Archbishop Matyos Izmirlian on November 4 as Patriarch of Istanbul. In the capital, local prelates were, as in the capital, local prelates were dismissed by the Armenian population in many parts of the provinces. For example, in Harpert, the Armenians succeeded in dismissing their bishop. In Diyarbakir, the local prelate escaped along with his mother, uncle, servants, and 4 soldiers, leaving behind, and I quote, the anger and the dismay of the community. The reinstatement of the Armenian National Constitution and the Armenian National Assembly, which became the center of Armenian policy making in the empire, were important political processes in the post-revolutionary period. The Armenian National Assembly contained most of the prominent Armenian clerical and lay figures in the empire. This included members of the Armenian political party, Armenian members of the Ottoman parliament, and representatives of different Armenian societies. An examination of the debates in the assembly sheds new light on the Armenian leadership's position during the post-revolutionary period up to the counter-revolution when the Ardana massacres took place. Constitutionalism became a key factor upon which the community's affairs were administered. The authority of the Armenian national constitution was even placed above that of the highest Armenian cleric, i.e. the patriarch. Partially as a result of this reorientation, the National Assembly became a mini parliament that, at least in its earlier stage, discouraged partisanship and advocated loyalty to the empire. When he was chosen to be the president of the Armenian National Assembly, Minas Cheras made the following statements. He said, "Delegates, reverence, and gentlemen, thanks to the reinstatement of the Ottoman constitution, the Armenian constitution, which has been paralyzed by despotism for years, was also reinstated. The rebirth of both constitutions is an equally happy occasion for us, because if it's the call of the Ottoman constitution to administer the affairs of the country according to the principle of justice, it is also the call of Armenian constitution to administer its national affairs according to the principles of justice, principles whose anchor is in the popular right, or according to an old expression, the voice of many, the voice of God." In general, three issues dominated the debate in the Armenian National Assembly during this period. The formation of a commission to investigate ex-Patriarch Ormanian, first. Second, the question of the provinces, situation in the provinces. And third, the question of Jerusalem. Of these, the situation in the provinces proved to be the most urgent issue and the most dire issue that the members of the Armenian National Assembly had to tackle. One of the major questions facing the Armenian National Assembly during the post-revolutionary period was the condition of Armenians in the eastern provinces, the 6 provinces. In some parts of these provinces, the constitution prevailed within 2 to 3 months of its proclamation. But in other areas, the ancien regime continued to rule. For example, the declaration of the constitution did not bring about any reform in Mush. On the contrary, the Hamidiyya regiments and the Kurdish Ashirets affiliated with the ancien regime oppressed the Armenian population there. The case of Mush attracted much attention in the Armenian press, and assembly members were pressured to respond meaningfully. Likewise, in Bitlis, the announcement of the constitution was followed by a violent reaction. The Kurdish teeth farmers there continued to oppress the population, and it was stated that the matter would be resolved with the arrival of the new Vali in Bitlis. Both the reaction of the local groups, such as the Kurdish Ashirets or the Hamidiyya regiments after the revolution and the counter-revolution, should be seen in the context of changes in the power dynamics in the eastern provinces. The Young Turk Revolution caused major changes in these dynamics, leading to an erosion of social and political stability. By disturbing precariously balanced power equilibrium, the revolution produced a great deal of dissatisfaction within some segments of the population. The condition of the provinces was discussed in depth in the Armenian National Assembly. On October 17, 1908, a petition prepared by the Assembly's Political Council was submitted to the Assembly, recommending that the government send an investigative commission to the eastern provinces in which the majority of the Armenians were living. The Political Council suggested that an official delegation headed by the local tenants should pay an official visit to the Grand Vizier Kamil Pasha. And they do go headed by the local tenants, Archbishop Turian. They go and meet the Grand Vizier Kamil Pasha and express to him that the condition of the eastern provinces is very dire, and we need to take care of the situation there, otherwise a lot of Armenians are dying as a result of repression. Kamil Pasha promises that he's going to take care of the issue, but he says there are a lot of things on my plate, I can't deal with it. But in the chapter I discussed in the parliamentary debates, he does bring a bill to the parliament to send that the investigative commission should be sent to the eastern provinces, but the CUP, relying on its majority in the parliament, aborts that bill, and that bill goes to the garbage, sorry to say. While the debates about the condition of the provinces were taking place, the counter-revolution and the Ottoman massacres of 1909 took place, events which elevated the level of concern and occupied a central position in the Assembly's debates. The revolution also paved the way for the Armenian political parties that were active in exile to return to the empire. Most of the political prisoners affiliated with these political parties were released from prison, and the revolutionary groups handed their weapons. Thus, the revolution transformed these groups from revolutionary groups to legally sanctioned political groups. However, the public sphere in which these groups acted also would contribute to a fierce and sometimes bloody competition between these groups over controlling intra-communal public opinion and the right to represent the Armenian nation. The center of activity for these political groups became Istanbul, from which they issued orders to the provinces. Immediately after the revolution, members of the Armenian Revolution Federation arrived from exile to Istanbul and began to organize a series of lectures in order to enlighten the public about their party's political and economic platform. The party's major policies were to cooperate with the CUP for the preservation and the protection of the constitutional regime, to establish all branches of the party in the provinces, to create powerful bloc in the parliament, to return the confiscated land that were confiscated during the Hamidian regime, and to gradually implement the basic administrative cultural decentralization. In the ARF's, Dashnak's first public address in Galata on 23rd of August 1908, Khachadur Malumian, Aknuni, very important figure in the ARF, explained the party's line to a capacity of crowd. And he said, "Compatriots, you are not Ottoman subject anymore. Rather, you are free Ottoman citizens. you can be sure of the eternity of your freedom. There is not any fear of the reinstatement of the previous regime. The aim of Dashnak Tükün became to create this freedom in despotic Turkey. From now on, its effort will be to preserve and spread this freedom at any cost, with cannon, swords, arms, and powder. The different elements that cooperated with the Dashnak Tükün in the Paris Congress agreed to this idea. Dashnak Tükün will seek to create for Turkey a free federated state on the basis of the principle of coexistential equality, whose different parts, being autonomous, will be supporters of the Ottoman fatherland. That's how they refer to Turkey, Ottoman fatherland. The ARF also spread widely in the provinces. In Mush and Van, the party was in control over the local dioceses. In spite of all of this, the Young Turk Revolution presented a major challenge to the Armenian revolutionary groups in the provinces. It created a revolutionary class whose existence as the Armenian revolutionary Rupen Der Matossian stated in his memoirs became, and I quote, an unnecessary thing, a rusted rifle left in a dark corner, end quote. Because the revolution had already been achieved. The Committee of Union and Progress, the CUP, argued that now that the constitution had been reinstated and freedom proclaimed, there was no need for revolutionary groups. Therefore, they maintained that members of the groups should either be disarmed or enter the ranks of the Ottoman army. This crisis was also reflected in the relationship between the political center of the Dashnaks from Istanbul, residing in Istanbul, and the revolutionary fringe in the provinces. While the leadership in Istanbul, most of which came from abroad, was optimistic about the post-revolution government, the leadership in the provinces was highly pessimistic about the situation, and some were even reluctant to hand in their weapons. The revolution also paved the way for other Armenian political groups to act in the empire. After the revolution, the Hınçaks, the Social Democratic Hınçakian Party, found in Geneva, leadership returned to Istanbul and began organizing its branches in the provinces. The Hınçaks had clear-cut policy, political autonomy for Armenia within the framework of a constitutional empire. They were reluctant to enter into any form of cooperation with the Committee of Union and Progress. The Hınçaks' two main aims became establishment branches in the empire and arming the people. They were ready to cooperate with the Dashnaks, but if the latter openly declared that they had cut all their ties with the CUP. The other parties that became active in the empire also was the Armenian Constitutional Democratic Party, the Ramgavars, founded in Alexandria in October 1908. And of course, we can add to this the reformed Hınçakian Party. A fierce and sometimes bloody competition began between these political parties, Armenian political parties. A state of affairs that was reflected in the partisan press, the Armenian National Assembly, and the provinces. The Hınçaks and the Ramgavars were extremely critical of the Dashnaks' policy of their relationship with the CUP. After the Adana massacres, the Dashnaks continued their close relationship with the CUP, leading to a great deal of tension among the empire's Armenian political parties. Now, after discussing the ways in which the revolution has influenced the Armenians of the Ottoman Empire, I'm going to discuss the ways in which it's influenced the Jews of the Ottoman Empire. On January 25, 1909, Jacques Bigot, Secretary General of the Alliance Israélite Universelle, Alliance Israélite Universelle is the famous educational society, played a dominant role in the education of the Jews in the Ottoman Empire. He wrote a letter to the chief rabbi of the Ottoman Empire, Chaim Nahum, expressing his contentment with the revolution by saying, and I quote, "Thus it may well be said that the whole Turkish revolution is like the triumph of our ideas that are so moderate yet so liberal and solely inspired by the love of the common good." End quote. The Young Turk Revolution's impact on the Jews in the empire should be analyzed from two perspectives. One perspective pertains to the micro-revolution that took place inside the Jewish millet, like its Armenian counterpart, and the second pertains to the increased Zionist activities in the empire after the revolution. The revolution paved the way for the Jewish progressive movement in the empire to start not only reforming their own community, but also taking an active part in the political, economic life of the empire. However, unlike the relatively smooth transition of power in the Armenian community, change in the Jewish community was met with some resistance from people loyal to the previous administration of Rabbi Moshe Halevi. The Jewish progressive movement's first task then was to take control out of the hands of the Rabbi Halevi, who had occupied the position of locum tenens without any formal appointment for more than 35 years. He was backed by Sultan Abdulhamid II. This caused, on the 17th of August 1908, the progressives succeeded when Chaim Nachum was chosen as the locum tenens. That's the picture of Chaim Nachum, a very important figure in the history of the Ottoman Empire of the Jews in the Second Constitution period, and he was backed by the CUP. This caused agitations and anxiety among the Jewish community of Istanbul. In order to strengthen his position, Nahum paid a couple of official visits to important figures. On 8th of September, for example, he visited Prince Sabahaddin, and on the 10th of September, he visited the ex-patriarch of the Armenians, Archbishop Matthias Ismailian. So all of these groups are cooperating with each other in order to create their own new regimes. It is important to stress here that the fact that the tensions emanating from Nahum's appointment as the locum tenens were the outcome of tensions between the Zionists and the Alliance Israélite Universelle that escalated after the revolution. Like the election of locum tenens, the election of the chief rabbi of Turkey occupies a central position in the Jewish press in Istanbul. On January 28, 1908, Nahum Pasha was elected chief rabbi with 74 votes. His opponent protested the election, arguing that only 3/4 of the delegates participated in the election. Nonetheless, the vast crowd that had assembled in the confines of the synagogue received the news of Nahum's success with great jubilation. Nahum was ushered into office with a policy focused that emphasized the reorganizations of Istanbul's Jewish community and aimed at centralizing power by attempting to bring the provinces under his grip. Even before his election as the chief rabbi, letters had begun to pour into the office of the chief rabbinate from the provinces, demanding that Nahum Pasha, as the locum tenens, dismiss their spiritual leaders because they represented the ancien regime of their own communities. The Jewish communities of Jerusalem, Damascus, and Saida held demonstrations against their rabbis. The governors of these locales also then telegraphed the Sublime Porte, arguing in support of the demonstrations. Consequently, the Minister of Justice wrote to the locum tenens demanding that they take action without delay. Finally, on September the 3rd, the Secular Council of the Jewish National Assembly convened under Nahum's presidency and decided to dismiss these three rabbis. Of these three dismissals, the issue of the dismissing of the locum tenens of the Rabbinate of Jerusalem became the most important complex issue that preoccupied the Jewish press in the empire. It became to be known in the local press as the question of Jerusalem, like its Armenian and Greek counterparts. So Jerusalem was a central issue after the 1908 revolution. On February 2, 1909, Vladimir Jabotinsky, for those of you who do not know Jabotinsky, a major figure in Zionism, he became the leader of revisionist Zionism after detaching himself from mainstream Zionism. One of the Zionist leaders wrote an article in the Hebrew newspaper Ha'olam means the world, discussing the post-revolution condition. And I quote, "The new situation in Turkey has opened in front of us new and wide horizons. But in order to make use of this situation, it is necessary that we have energy and tactics. And it is difficult to say what more, tactics or energy. Of course, the aim is to try to find a way in order to realize the Zionist goal of establishing a Jewish homeland in Palestine. The 1908 revolution did indeed provide important venues for the Zionist activities in the empire and the realization of the Zionist goal. Even prior to the revolution, the Zionists felt that they needed a permanent representative in Istanbul in order to realize their goals. David Wolfson, who was at the time the president of the World Zionist Organization, had expressed this view during the meeting of the Inner Action Committee of Zionism in Cologne, in Germany, where he reported on his visits to Ottoman Empire. Wolfson argued that there was a serious inclination at the highest levels of the Ottoman government to deal with Zionism, and that the time was ripe for political activity. At the same time, Dr. Avigdor Jakobson, a Russian Jew who was director of the Anglo-Palestine Bank branch in Beirut, was appointed to represent the organization in Istanbul and charged with promoting the interests of Zionism in Istanbul, in the empire. While these plans were being made, the Young Turk Revolution took place, opening up new possibilities for Wolfson and others who hoped that the Young Turk Revolution would not pursue, the Young Turks would not pursue the anti-Zionist policy of their predecessors, meaning Abdulhamid II. Jakobson, who was sent by Wolfson to Istanbul, arrived in the empire in August 26, 1908. From Istanbul, he communicated with Wolfson 2 to 3 times a week. I've examined their correspondences in the Zionist archive. In one of the first letters, in one of his first letters to Jakobson, Wolfson described the role that Jakobson needs to play. According to him, Jakobson's immediate task was to gather information about the political condition and conduct a series of important meetings with the key figures in both the Jewish community and the Ottoman political milieu more generally without entering into any negotiations. The task involved meeting with the leaders of the Jewish communities in Istanbul, Izmir, and Salonika. In his first letter to Wolfson, Jakobson described the situation in Turkey, expressing his hopes for the promulgation of new laws regarding the purchase of lands that would be beneficial for the Zionist cause. Jakobson, however, wanted to do more active job of promoting Zionist approach to the empire's Jewish communities and entering the negotiations with Ottoman authorities. After meeting with Vital Faraji, who became the member of the Ottoman parliament representing Istanbul, Jakobson wrote back to Wolfson saying that Faraji thought it was not the right time for Zionists to make demands for territorial concessions. As to the issue of Jewish immigration to the Ottoman Empire, Faraji told Jakobson that it would be possible to get support from a number of Turkish leaders, but said that it was not the right time to start a campaign in the press towards that end either. In the beginning of 1909, the Zionist leadership seemed optimistic about their activities. One of their main achievements in Istanbul during the period was to mobilize 2 members of the parliament, Jewish members of the parliament, to represent their interests. Jakobson was able to mobilize Nissim Masliach and Nissim Rousseau, both of whom were influential and expressed a keen interest in Zionism. Wolfson sent them a letter in which he thanked them for meeting with Jakobson and maintained that the parliamentary way would be the best path to achieving the aims of Zionism. He also asked them to explain to the parliament, to the Ottoman parliament, that Zionism did not have, and I quote, a separatist aspiration, une aspiration séparatiste, it was written in French, and concluded his letter by urging the Ottoman Jews to defend Zionist cause. As Zionist influence expanded, one of Jakobson's major tasks became the establishment of a newspaper in Istanbul that would promote Zionist ideas, a process that began as early as 1909. The newspaper would touch on issues pertaining to the Jewish minority, Jewish autonomy, and immigration problems. Immigration, of course, to Palestine. Jakobson also proposed that a committee be formed in Istanbul to deal with publicity. It was not until after the counter-revolution in March that such a committee was finally formed. From the Zionist perspective, political perspective, they said we don't only have to deal with the Ottoman authorities to try to convince them. First thing that we need to do, we have to convince the Sephardic Jews in the Ottoman Empire to what Zionism means and how can we sell them the idea. The power dynamics that emerged in the empire's Jewish community as a result of the revolution were complex. The rise of Nahum Pasha to the rabbinate was a tremendous victory for the progressive movement among the Jews. The revolution also opened up new horizons for the Zionists, but it created major obstacles for the realization of their goal. The chief rabbi of the empire, Chaim Nahum Pasha, along with David Fresco, the editor of the Ladino newspaper El Tiempo, became the main opponents of Zionist activities in the empire. In addition to external threat, Zionists also suffered from serious internal division. As a result of these divisions, in the end of March, Wolfson said, "I'm going to Istanbul to try to find and to try to solve this situation," and he also wanted to publish a journal in person. However, just before his departure, the counter-revolution took place, and the plans were delayed, and these attempts were unified. The party was put on hold. The last sample is the Arab provinces, a very important aspect because a lot of what happens in the Arab provinces also mirrors in Anatolia. The impact of the Young Turk Revolution on the Arab provinces should be viewed not only from the perspective of the Arab provinces, but also from that of the imperial palace. After all, it is there that the close confidence of the Sultan from the Arab provinces, who played the role of intermediaries, keeping the fine-tuned balance between the local notables, the Ayan and the palace, found their end. On first sight, it appears that the revolution did indeed cause serious changes in the dynamics of power in the Arab provinces. Okay? Making a generalization about the impact of the revolution on the Arab provinces would, however, be misleading. The euphoric feelings and mass demonstrations in the cities of the Arab provinces after the revolution should not be perceived as the beginning of a mass movement. Each city was influenced in a different way. For example, the politics of notables in Damascus was not the same as the politics of notables in Beirut or Palestine. Hence, though every locality was influenced by the Young Turk Revolution, the impact varied from districts to districts depending on the local exigencies. When the news of the revolution arrived in the Arab provinces, local authorities received it with great reservation and were unwilling to declare the constitution valid. Some were skeptical about the news, while others feared that such a step would lead to the erosion of social and political stability. In addition to the local officials, the notables and the ulema also were stunned by the news. They were afraid that the revolution and the shift of the center of power from the local authorities to the CUP would endanger their traditional source of legitimacy, power, status, and prestige. These fears certainly had a basis in fact. After this revolution, CUP branches and clubs mushroomed in Syria, and although these organizations began as local initiatives, many activists became self-acclaimed ittihadists. They eventually were taken over by the Central Committee of the CUP in Salonika. The CUP branches threatened the notables and the ulema by temporarily becoming the de facto forces in local politics in the Syrian districts during the post-revolutionary political gap. In addition to bringing CUP branches to Syria, the revolution also resulted in the creation of Arab political movements, the first of which was the Arab Ottoman Brotherhood Society, established in Istanbul by the dismissed Arab functionaries of the Ancien regime. So, for the sake of time, I'm just going to concentrate on the autonomous district of Mount Lebanon. But let me discuss briefly the other places like Damascus and Beirut. Of course, in all these places, the CUP was going to enter as the main player during the post-revolution period. They were going to dismiss left and right officials, governors, even some of them were good towards Armenians, for example. But because the CUP now wanted to put its hand on all the provinces and control all the power structures, they were able to do that, except in the case of Damascus, where the local Ayan and the ulema were very strong, using their cards of tradition and religion, were able to defeat the CUP. But let's see what's happening in the case of Mount Lebanon. In Mount Lebanon, of course, from the civil war of 1860, had a specific arrangement with the Ottoman Empire. It was an autonomous region ruled by its own governor. Governor had to be Catholic. The first governor, Davut Pasha, was an Armenian, and the last governor, Ohannes Pasha, was an Armenian. It was ruled by the Règlement Organique, decided, agreed upon by all the major powers. In Mount Lebanon, news of the reinstatement of the constitution was received with certain amount of reservation, since society there was split over the question of whether the mountain should take part in the Ottoman parliament. The centrality of the Maronite Patriarchate is a key factor of understanding the impact of the revolution on Mount Lebanon, where clerical and anti-clerical politics intertwined with the dynamics of regime change. The Maronite clerical opposed sending representatives to the parliament, whereas the Druze, is a subsection of Shiism, the Greek Orthodox and other minority sects were in favor of it. Those who were ruling Mount Lebanon saw that if Mount Lebanon participates in the elections, the Ottoman elections, they were immediately going to lose their privileges which were given to them since 1860, the privileges of 1861, privileges of autonomy. These dynamics indicate that the constitution not only created tensions between different sects on the mountain, but also opened a new door for the anti-clerical Maronite movement to rid itself of its ancien regime through the inclusion of Lebanon in the Ottoman parliament. In doing so, they would subvert the authority of the Maronite Patriarch, Ilyas Butros al-Hawayik. Until today, the Maronite Patriarch plays a dominant role in the political sphere in Lebanon. As a conservative, the Patriarchate shared Sultan Abdul Hamid's opposition to any social and political change. For both Abdul Hamid and Hawayik, the Young Turks and the anti-clerical movement threatened the stability of the existing order. With the success of the revolution, the anti-clerical movement on the mountain grew stronger and their activities increased in order to curb the power of the church and initiate administrative reforms. Existing tensions in Lebanon came to a head in the celebration of Sultan's enthronement, which took place in Beit ad-Din, which was the government's palace on September 2, 1908. This is Lebanon today, government's palace back during the Ottoman period. On the same day, thousands of Druze and Maronites from Deir el-Qamar gathered in Beit ad-Din, carrying arms with long pikes, and skirmishes took place between the Druze and the Christians, leading to the death of one person from each side and the injury of many others. On the 5th of September, members of these factions held a meeting in Beirut and drafted a list of 5 demands for the governor of Lebanon. These demands included the proclamation of the constitution in Mount Lebanon, the dissolution of the administrative council in Mount Lebanon, elections for the council of members, of a new council members, the dismissal of corrupt officials and cellular phones, the abolition of new taxes, and the formation of a provisional advisory committee. The governor, Yusuf Pasha, refused to carry these demands. A week later, let's concentrate here, later, on the 12th of September, an 80-person deputation of the Liberal Party went to the Beit ad-Din and presented the governor with 5 additions. Under their pressure, the government succumbed and he says, well, I'm going to accept the constitution. But then things changed, and towards the end, the liberal faction within Lebanon was not able to achieve its aims, and Lebanon remained an autonomous region. Conclusion. So the lecture, as we heard, aimed at discussing the impact of the Young Turk Revolution on 3 ethnic groups by examining the changes in the dynamics of power within them. It contends that the post-revolutionary ethnic politics within the empire should not be viewed only from the prism of the political parties, which people tend to do, if it's Armenian political parties or it's other Bulgarian or Albanian political parties, but also through ecclesiastic politics, church politics, which was a key factor in defining inter- and intra-ethnic politics. Interestingly, despite the fact that the revolution aimed at creating modern, secular Ottoman citizen whose loyalty was going to be to the state, it nevertheless strengthened the ethno-religious political centers of ethnic groups. It did so by creating space in which fierce competition began among the different actors within these communities for control over power positions. In the Jewish case, the center of power remained in the chief rabbinate. The election of Chaim Nahum Pasha as the chief rabbi strengthened the chief rabbi's role as the ethno-religious representative of Sephardic Jewry. But this became increasingly difficult in a period where new actors entered the public sphere in the Ottoman Empire, and those were the Zionists. The Zionists
who aimed at winning over public opinion of the Sephardic Jewry of the empire for their activities, were considered an undesirable element in the empire by the chief rabbinate and by many other prominent Sephardic figures. This was because part of the Sephardic Jews feared that the Zionist goal of creating a Jewish state in Palestine could arouse the Turkish and Arab elements in the empire, and as a matter of fact would cause harm to the Sephardic Jews. In the Armenian case, the center of power shifted smoothly from the Patriarchate to the Armenian National Assembly, which became the representative of the Armenian ethnic groups in the empire. Unlike the Jewish case, the Armenian National Assembly included as representative of most of the Armenian religious and political currents, and after the Ottoman massacres of 1909 period, it became a battleground between the different Armenian political groups. In addition, the revolution also paved the way for the strengthening of Armenian political groups in the empire, most prominently the Dashnaks, who by propagating their, and I quote unquote, grandiose role in the Great Revolution, tried to strengthen their status in the Armenian circle. By using their close connection with the CUP, they claimed to be the representatives of the Armenian ethnic group in the Ottoman Empire. In geographic regions such as Arab provinces, where intricate political realities were characterized by ascendancy of the notables, the revolution threatened to disrupt the fine-tuned balance and transfer power to emerging politicians who were primarily representatives of the CUP. It is, however, evident that the new politicians lacked crucial tool that the notables enjoyed in the provinces, religion and tradition. Removing the ancien regime from the power in the Arab provinces also proved particularly difficult, because unlike the Armenian and the Jewish communities, power in the Arab provinces was not concentrated in one person. You have multiplicity of power centers. It was rather embodied in multiplicity of notables. For these reasons, despite the emergence of the CUP branches in the Arab provinces and despite their at least temporary control over the government, they lacked the support of the majority of the population. In the case of Lebanon, Mount Lebanon, however, the situation was more complex than that of Damascus or Beirut. For more than half a decade, the règlement organique that I mentioned earlier has ruled in the area. And despite this equilibrium after the events of 1861, some elements within the Lebanese society remained discontent in the ways in which the Maronite Church was functioning. And the Young Turk Revolution was going to provide the ultimate opportunity for them to get rid of the despotic regime that was ruling the mountain. And before I make the final grand conclusion, I'm going to show you this picture. Now, what do you see in this picture? Why do you think this is an important picture? It's written Uni pour la patrie, Vatanan Aulana Ittihad, united for the fatherland, okay? I can't say anything. United for the fatherland. And this is a central image, one of the pictures in the book. This is not the school I made, but...
What was the question again?
What do you see in the picture? Why this picture is such a powerful picture, but yet failed to achieve its goal, as a matter of fact?
Shows the minorities united.
Very good. Shows the minorities united. Where is that thing? I wanted only to use it now. So basically, you have representatives of all the elements of the Ottoman Empire, all of them united under the the army. The army is carrying the Turkish flag, should be red, but the original is black and white. Uni pour la patrie, united for the fatherland, Watana Aurana Ittihad. And then you have representative. Who is this guy, you think? Greek. This? Who? No, not Armenian. It's very easy. Arab. Come on.
Russians.
No, yeah, Caucasus. Circassian.
Oh.
Cherkess. Who's this guy in the back? They put him in the back. Now understand, he didn't have any voice. Armenian priest. Then he didn't have any voice. Again, maybe Bulgarian, Balkans. You see, this is the aim of the revolution. But the revolution failed to achieve its goals, and there are a couple of reasons for that. So, why did the Young Turk Revolution took place? A couple of things. In the beginning of the 20th century, the CUP's major aim, as a matter of fact, was not constitution or parliament. Its aim was to preserve the territorial integrity of the Ottoman Empire. Its aim was to preserve the territorial integrity of the Ottoman Empire. And at the time, constitutionalism and parliament were the acceptable norms of political system. So they accepted constitutionalism and parliamentarism, but they used it as a means to an aim. Aim is to preserve the territorial integrity of the Ottoman Empire at a time in which major sections of the Ottoman Empire they've been losing it. So constitutional and parliamentarism being the existing norms of governance, political systems, they embraced that. Were they true constitutionalists? I don't think so. CUP's uncritical adaptation, acceptance, and implementation of constitutional and parliamentarism failed to create a unified nation. Anytime that you accept constitutionalism and parliamentarism, you have to be critical. It's not like a jacket that you take it, buy it, and put it on any person. There needs to be modification. There needs to be, so their uncritical adaptation, acceptance, and implementation failed to create that unified nation. Even on the eve of the revolution, the movement's the ideals of the movements of the Young Turk Revolution and principles were ambiguous. And this ambiguity created a lot of tension between the ruling elite, between the CUP and other groups. The ideals of the revolution were themselves contradictory. And again, there was a clash of vision between the dominant and the non-dominant groups. And this clash of vision did not take place after the revolution. It was there even prior to the revolution. CUP believed in centralization, in cutting the privileges of the Christians, in instituting Turkish as the major language in the empire, and whereas the other groups believed in administrative decentralization, in keeping the privileges. So there is a clash of ideas even on the eve of the revolution. And of course, in order to preserve the Ottoman Empire, the CUP, and this is well known, they pursued extra legal and extra constitutional steps in order to achieve their goal. And their goal is to remain in power and to preserve the territorial integrity of the Ottoman Empire. In order to do that, they also pursued authoritarian tendencies, became authoritarian. Think of it. Most of the parliament was controlled by the CUP members. And how did they get the votes? It wasn't democratically. So having a parliament and parliament members whose majority is made of CUP members doesn't bring any solution to the other groups. Specifically when you see the bill that was submitted by the Armenian deputies in the parliament in order to send an investigative commission to the eastern provinces, that bill specifically, which is an extremely important bill, which was going to initiate reforms, this is even 1908, we're not talking 1913, 1914. That bill failed because the CUP, counting on its majority in the Ottoman Empire, they were always wanted to abort any suggestions or any bills that came from the part of either the liberals or the Armenians or the Greeks. So the revolutionary dreams, since the title of the book is Shattered Dreams of Revolution, and I think now you should understand why it's called Shattered Dreams of Revolutions. There's much more discussion into the subject, but I just want to concentrate on the third chapter. The revolution dreams of the empire's non-dominant groups were shattered not only by the CUP's authoritarian tendencies, but also by the contradictory dynamics that highlighted the revolutionary and post-revolutionary political process. The incompatibility of their dreams with those of the CUP and the asymmetries of power that defined the relationship with the Young Turk ensured these disappointments. From their weak position as non-dominant groups, they attempted to pressure the CUP into implementing long-awaited reforms and pushed for decentralization, administrative decentralization. Once they realized that the democratic process and their political vision had been aborted, these groups resorted to mobilizing international powers to exert pressure on the Ottoman government, a kind of interference that the CUP had despised from the day of its inception. And I argue that in the end, the revolution dreams of all the empire's political and national groups were shattered because in an era of rising nationalism and increased global communication, the Ottoman Empire, like many other empires, fell victim to the rise of nation state. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Bedross.
QA.
Questions? Yes. Please stand though so we can all hear.
How do you claim that you see there's characteristics about the CUP in the last slide were the same before and after the counter-revolution? Or was there something distinctive about them before and then after?
No, it's been before and after. Before and after.
Before and after.
Because think of it, they made all their efforts in order to abort any suggestions, anything that dealt with the situation of the eastern provinces from the perspective of Armenians, for example. Yeah. And Armenians had so much high hopes that this is the new regime that the CUP is going to, especially the Dashnaks, I should say, not the Hunchaks, that they had such a high hope, even the Patriarch of the Armenian National Assembly, that they're going to achieve reforms and fix the situation of the eastern provinces. But even prior to 1909, the CUP, relying on its majority in the parliament, blocked any type of bill or suggestions or to improve the condition.
Yes, Doc.
I was curious what was going on with the other minorities, for example.
Yeah, very good, yeah. Greeks, I don't have much information about the Greeks because in my research I rely on primary sources in the native languages of these cases, be it Hebrew, Ottoman, Ladino, Armenian, Arabic. In order to understand what's happening in the Greek case, we need to understand also how their public opinion was shaped, understand the minutes of the Greek National Assembly, or the Greek newspapers or the press. So my approach is that I did not touch that section, but of course the revolution was going to create a lot of turmoil within the Greek community. I mean, the Greek community is totally different. The faction is, there's the Constantinople committee backed by the Greek government. So it's a much more different case. The three cases that I discussed here do not have any external fatherland that can be, can help them in achieving their goals.
Yes.
What was happening in the Ottoman Empire in 1878 when the group of men who formed the CUP formed it? What was their reason for forming? And what was the context of the Ottoman Empire vis-a-vis the world?
Well, we're talking about the era of, during the Tanzimat reforms. The young Turks are the descendants of the young Ottomans. They were trained in the education system that was established by the Tanzimat reforms, and even by Abdul Hamid himself. The origins of the CUP was formed in the Ottoman Medical University, Ibrahim Temo and many other people. And they were influenced, the CUP, both the external and the internal one, the expatriate community who were banished after 1878. All of them were influenced by raging European ideology of materialism, biological materialism, positivism, influenced by ideas of constitutionalism and change. They were influenced by change. And they saw that the only way that they can change and minimize the power of the monarchy was through instituting the constitution back and opening the parliament. But they were not revolutionary from the beginning. They did not believe the revolution as a means of change It was only after 1902 or 1907 that they accepted the fact that it was only through revolution that we were going to bring a change in the Ottoman Empire. Yes.
Can we say they were deceiving the leadership of the minority leadership?
The CUP meaning deceiving?
Yes.
Well, it could be. It could be they were deceiving, but I can't. I mean, I can't answer that question saying they were deceiving. How would you know that they were deceiving? I mean, think of it. In Paris, they would sit together in coffee shops with the representatives of the CUP. Armenians would go. There are memoirs about that. Well, today we went and saw Ahmed Riza, who was the leader of the majority faction of the Young Turks. We sat with Ahmed Riza. We brought the maps and we told him what do we want. And he didn't agree or agree. He said, yeah, we'll take care of it. You know, so revolutions, usually you don't make promises for revolutions. When revolution happens, then we're going to deal with that. Or there are no promises in any revolution. You cannot predict what's going to happen after revolutions. Of course, everyone for 30 years they're planning in the exile as to how they're going to initiate the revolution. And once the revolution happened, they are a bit, you know, in a chaotic situation. So what needs to be done with the revolution? Specifically the fact that the revolution was a bloodless revolution. And sorry to say that, but bloodless revolutions are more scary than bloody revolution. Yeah, that's the case because it creates a dissatisfied element that would kick back at the time when the right time comes. And that's what happened in the case of the Young Turk Revolution. It was met by a very fierce counter-revolution, bloody counter-revolution, reflected in the Ottoman massacres, where more than 20 to 30,000 Armenians were killed as part of the counter-revolutionary movement. So that's, don't misunderstand when I'm saying that revolution should be bloody. I hope that there shouldn't be any revolutions, you know, because we're seeing the revolution in the Middle East. It's not going anywhere, you know. So people would say, oh, I hope you were living in prior period, prior to revolution, rather than this unknown, you know, period of the post-revolutionary period.
No, no.
Thank you, Bedross, for this lecture and commentations on the book. How do you explain the difference then between the Hunchak response and the Tashnak response?
The difference.
Yes, you're saying that ARF was more hopeful. They were,
Yeah.
and Hunchak wasn't. What
I mean, the relationship would start even from the beginning. Hunchaks from the beginning didn't participate in the 1902 Congress, the first Congress. The RF and the reformed Hunchak, Peragazmial Hunchak, reformed Hunchak represented, so to say, Armenians in the conference. Their ideology was totally different. They wanted an autonomy. In the beginning, they wanted independence of Armenia. Then they changed, the Hunchaks changed their political view, and they said, okay, we want political autonomy in a decentralized form. But again, after that, CUP's close relationship with the ARF meant that the ARF was going to claim itself as the representative of the Armenians, and the Hunchaks were always critical of the ARF and the CUP. They did not trust the CUP from the beginning, even prior to the revolution. Even in the end of the 19th century, they were very critical of the CUP and the Young Turks, and they never cooperated with them. Even when they come to Istanbul after 1908, there are a couple of meetings that take place between the Hunchaks and the Ittihadists. And the CUP sends a couple of representatives, and those do not yield to any result, because totally the Hunchaks are not ready to cooperate with the CUP. On the other hand, Dashnaks being a major, it was more powerful. Dashnaks were more powerful than the Hunchak. From the beginning, they were cooperating with the CUP with the aim of trying to bring a new regime, trying to bring more hope and fix specifically the major issue is the situation of the eastern provinces. So.
Ümit.
Yeah, thank you so much for such an insightful presentation.
Yeah.
It's a question raised, especially for me who's currently writing this dissertation regarding this time period as well. I have many questions, but I have no.
Please limit yourself to 10, Ümit, okay?
do it in two.
More than 10. So you said, especially this point is striking for me. You said reforms or the reception of the constitution or the revolution, the ideas of revolution were not applied in Mush and Bitlis particularly.
Of course, yeah.
No reaction.
Not revolution, the constitution wasn't implemented.
Itself, yeah, the formal ones, yeah.
Yeah.
So, did you discern any difference between what were happening after man of the revolution in Cilicia, in Aintab, in Kilis, for instance, vis-a-vis these Mush and Bitlis, eastern provinces?
Okay, one important thing that we have to notice that we cannot say that all the provinces reacted simultaneously with the same way. Dependent on the government, on the governor, dependent on the situation. For example, they were successful. The transition was successful in some places. In other places, the transition wasn't successful for 3-4 months. They had to struggle there until a new body came. But again, did the CUP have power in all of these regions? And the example that I would like to bring is the case of Adana, Cilicia. So in Adana, for example, when the revolution takes place, the CUP establishes itself there as let me put it in this way. The CUP in the beginning doesn't send people out that much. There's a lot of self-acclaimed CUP member. So I'm Bedross Der Matossian, another person who comes and says, I'm an Ittihadist now. And they send telegrams to Salonika, to the center of the CUP, telling them that I've established here a CUP thing. And then they get the order that, okay, you did a good job, continue with that, okay? And then you start establishing cells, some major cells, they established major cells. Bahri Pasha, who was the governor of Adana, was in very cordial relationship with the Armenians, especially with Mushekh Sirpazad. And to that extent, the CUP didn't like Bahri Pasha because he represented most of the government in the eyes of the CUP, represented the ancien regime. Whether they were good or bad, half of them were good, half of them were bad. But they dismissed everyone outside. They removed them from their positions and brought new figures. But in the case of Adana, for example, the governor who came, Javid Pasha, was anti-CUP leader. Okay, he was influenced by the notables who existed there. So that's why I'm telling you, the politics of notables in the Arab provinces and in Anatolia plays a dominant role in the ways in which you perceive CUP.
This is exactly what I was going to correct. So how do you see the power of the CUP at the local levels? I mean, legitimacy, social support mechanisms. So the consent of different sections of society towards the revolution, because you said within the parliament, even though CUP had the majority, they aborted the reform package or reform policy, whatever.
Yeah, the Reform Investigation Commission.
For instance, even though CUP had the majority in the parliament, but these members or the deputies which were being represented in the name of CUP didn't have the ideals or the ideas of CUP. We know that. So how do you see the local, the support or the legitimacy basis of CUP at the local level?
Depends on the provinces too, from area to area, based on local exigencies. I use this word in the exigencies, meaning that in some places they were successful, helped by the army to establish, like Beirut, they would establish a CUP club and immediately bring 100 members, including Armenians, Greeks, and Arabs, okay? Not only Turks, Armenians, Greeks, and Arabs become part of CUP cells. But again, you have created a lot of class that is dissatisfied from the revolution. So there are a lot of tensions within the provinces. So that's how, we shouldn't think of Anatolia as a successful place for revolution like its European counterpart, meaning European part of the Ottoman Empire.
So just the last one, so which means we cannot argue that there was a complete removal or complete purge of the ancien regime at the governmental, at the bureaucratic level.
No.
Also.
No. Yeah.
Your beard just grew longer.
That's a very good question.
Taner Akçam.
So,
That's a difficult question.
I have a very interesting question, but before that, I know I'm the last person to talk on Armenian organizations, but could I make the distinction between Hrinchak and ARF during that period that the Khinchaks were more liberal based on their political program, because beginning with the revolution, they really started cooperating with Ahrar Fırkası.
Oh, of course, yes.
And they
Yes.
had really a more liberal program.
Yes.
It was not only the issue of trust, it was also an issue of
Oh, you're
program.
right, you're right.
So
You're right.
this
No,
is-
no, you're definitely right. Because a lot of Armenians, the Hinchaks also, they had the Ahrar Fırkası, they wanted to, because, you know, just for example, when the Zionists, when Jakobsen is in Istanbul trying to represent the interest of the Zionist, in one of his letters he says to the, one of his letters to the president, Wolfson, he says, I'm not going to go, why are you supporting the Ahrar Fırkası? They're not again with us, we have to support the CUP. And the president of the Zionist organization sends him a letter saying, this is not the time to take sides. We have to play on all sides. You don't know, the liberals do not have a chance today, but maybe in the future they might come into power, which they did for a very short time, and then it was led to go by the coup d'etat of 1915. Yeah.
So here my question on the reforms. As you know, this reform packet brought to parliament by Kamil Pasha,
Yeah.
it was never named as Armenian reforms.
Ehali.
Yeah.
Anadolu'nun ehalileri.
So do you think that this reform packet program, which was then dismissed by parliament after Adana massacre, had a...
No, it was dismissed even before Adana massacre.
No, it was July 4th, 1909, the last date. There was debate afterwards also. My question is whether this reform packet, for your understanding and research, had any impact on event in Istanbul, 31st March, uprising military operation, I mean the military mutiny against the CUP,
Oh, no,
this
no.
and Adana. Can you see any connection there?
No.
No?
No.
Okay.
Of course, the only connection would be that they didn't take the measures. You know, after the revolution, a lot of letters kept pouring to the Armenian Patriarchate, to the Armenian newspapers, saying that the situation is really bad here. You need to take care of it. We need to take care of it. And the CUP, with its newspaper Tanin, claimed that these are fake forgeries. These letters are copies of letters that were sent during the Hamidian massacres, and we don't believe in them. And that's not only the case. Iktam, the liberal, you know, Ali Kemal's newspaper, they even published it, these letters saying that we don't believe in the sense of urgency that exists in Anatolia. So that's how, you see, I mean, these people are sending right news there. You know, the situation is boiling due to the fact, again, that the revolution has created a lot of tension within the Anatolian provinces of Ancien regime versus CUP, or what would the Armenian do in this clash? And Adana would represent that case too. You know, the CUP branch there, and the Ayan, and and the governor were in constant clash of demonstrations and hating each other. So, and when the time came, you know, when the counter-revolution took place, the Adana massacres, all of these anxieties manifested themselves in the revolution. But again, I think that from the beginning, one important point also that you raised, it has to do with the fact that most of the Armenian parliamentarians, be it Zohrab, be it Vartkes, and many others, played as a bloc. And if you see the book, the chapter on the elections, prior to the election or prior to the elections, they meet. There are meetings that are taking place between these future potential parliamentary members, or between the members of the Armenian bloc. They form an Armenian bloc, and they say that's how we're going to represent our cause in the parliament, believing that the parliament is the ultimate way to solve the situation of the empire. Again, the parliament proved to be just a majoritarian parliament controlled by the CUP. And when they raise the situation of the Armenian provinces, there are long sections of Vartkes speaking, Zohrab speaking, and many others speaking Armenians. They do not mention Armenians of the East provinces. They say Ahalilar. Ahali means people, people of the East. The dire situation of the people of the East. But what do they mean by people of the East? They mean the Armenians of the East. But they cannot discuss it as the people of the Armenians of the East, lest that be translated that you only care about your own people and coming to the parliament and just representing the, because there's also the famine in the east, so they wanted to just represent something more encompassing with the other people in the region.
Bedross, if people want to learn more about this, is there a book they can read?
Your book.
Oh, my God. I can get it for cheaper prices if you're interested. Yes, please buy it from NAASR.
Please
NAASR bought
visit the
300 copies of the book, so you can make sure.
And, okay, well, I was going to stop there, but
Quick question.
The night is long.
the night is long. Please come on up and have conversations and enjoy some.
She's a Jerusalemite, so.
Oh,
card.
then we have to take both then, because I don't want to show geographical privilege.
Representation. Quick question, since we talked about Kriko Zohar. Is it true that he knew that there was a plan to massacre the Armenians 3 years prior to 1915?
We can't, these are things that we cannot prove, we cannot know, So I don't think so. For example, the Adana massacres, there are a lot of writings that they say it's the storm would come soon, even in 1908, that there's a storm that will come soon, and that's the code that I tried to say here. And the code says that this revolution is bloodless, and we don't believe in this revolution. Something bloody is going to happen. So that's how they were afraid that because you have created a lot of dissatisfied elements within the empire that are extremely unhappy with the revolution, and they're going to hit back in order to reclaim their previous position with the Abdelhamid's era that they enjoyed that position.
Ed?
No, just a minor question. I'm wondering how many, look on the map today, how many countries today were in the Ottoman Empire?
Most of the Arab Middle East, the Eastern Europe, the Balkan states, part of Eastern Europe, most of the Arab countries, and North Africa.
More than 20 today's countries?
Yeah, you can say probably. Some of them were provinces brought together to create a time bomb. The case of Iraq. Iraq never existed as an entity. So.
Thank you, Bedross.
Yeah.
Thank you all.